So they know that that's when it last had its major eruption. There has been little minor ones since then, but usually volcanoes kind of burp a little bit, over time, but not a major one.
Yep.
So what happened was you find out that they have great geologic records of this, that when Mount Nemrut exploded, its debris, there's no writings anywhere inside the Great Pyramid at all. There's something scribbled that is supposedly scribbled with Khufu's name that is very likely a forgery that's been talked about from the 1800s. It's a whole story that you can get into, but there's no writings anywhere in any of those. In fact, most megalithic structures around the world, for instance, Peru and Bolivia, there's no writings in any of the megaliths anywhere there. It just got back from Peru. There's not one place where there's writings like in it, okay? Same with Egypt. The blocks don't have writings. So here we have beautiful megalithic work around Lake Van with writings that are sporadic in a couple places, but most of them have nothing on them. And so the argument that I'm putting forth is that the Urartians came forward and had a warlike culture, and they were fighting the Assyrians like crazy back and forth. They, through their own wanting to be a superior civilization and showing their dominance, they put their names and they took credit for an earlier civilization that built these and then put their cuneiform into it.
So that's where we get they build the castle on top of what
exactly.
Yeah.
And then they incorporate the existing structures into their culture. Whereas if we look at the capabilities of the Urartians through their art, pottery, what they were doing, they severely lacked any of the capability in my mind. It's from everything I've studied and other archaeologists have put forth and have talked about as well, is that it doesn't match any of their other building styles. You can see other Urartian building styles with crude stonework and mud brick, and it doesn't match that time period at all. It just doesn't.
So it's an outlier, and there would have to be something unforeseen in the capabilities of their civilization or in the stylistic culture or whatever of their civilization for this to actually be attributed to them completely from where the base was.
If you take out the cuneiform, there's no evidence that the Urartians built it at all.
Okay.
None. And so that's where we get into is whether or not they just carved cuneiform into some of these structures to take credit for them, like Shavus Tepe, like Ionis. We see a lot of examples of that around the world, as I said, of cultures adopting and trying to take ownership of something that they didn't actually build.
Sure.
Now, let's get back to Lake Van.
Yes, because I originally opened up this tangent with asking about the main, 3-5 things, whatever it is, that you're going to be looking for going down there.
So the stonework.
Yep.
All right, that was a long
good tangent. I like that.
Tangent to talk about the stonework. When you go down under Lake Van, you see highly precise stonework, just like we see above the water at Ionis, Shavus Tepe, Kefkalesi, Asverna Tepe, Toprakal, all their other sites where you see beautiful, beautiful stonework at the bases of these with basalt and andesite where it's finely cut and polished. And we see the same thing underwater, okay? And that's the first thing we bring up is that it has the same kind of architecture. Now, the big thing about the next piece of evidence I want to bring up is for dating. And then we can talk about the symbols that are carved into the stone.
Yes, we'll get there.
I think that the dating potential under Lake Van creates a scenario that is unusual anywhere in the world. First thing is that you can't date stone above water. It gets extremely affected by the environment of weathering and other environments. The only reason Göbekli Tepe was able to be dated is because it was buried.
Yes, buried.
Okay, so then they were able to go in and carbon date the organic material in the cracks of that. Now, some of that could be possible at some of these sites if they do it right, because we have evidence that Kefkalesi and Ionis was buried as well. Evidence that the Urartians buried it because they were being invaded and it was potentially going to be destroyed by other cultures, and they knew it was important. And so, like, Ionis was a giant hillside mound on top, and they found evidence that not only was it either deliberately, basically, it was like a castle on top, that it was not broken in, but basically collapsed in on itself, and then buried on top of that with a very thick layer up to 5 or sometimes even 10 feet of material that was then put on top. So the amount of work necessary to bury these would have been enormous, but you would have done that if you wanted to preserve them. So that is what we've found, is that possibly could be another avenue is some of the soil and some of the dating done on this. And I'm in talks with Robert Schoch on whether or not that's something we're going to be pursuing with some of these sites as well.
And because it's in the lake, you can actually do it in a more verifiable way.
You have but the potential of soil sampling, core sampling of soil, that is different with an undisturbed underwater situation than you do above ground. And so that's something that's possible in the future. But let me bring up the big one here. There's a big one. Again, how do you date any of this then, besides what I just said? You don't get much more than that. You get some types of organic dating if you have it available based on the scenario. And then there's like vitrification of melting of rock that we identified. That's another possibility to do some dating on. But the big one is this. So as I mentioned, this underwater ruins of Lake Vaughan are 75 feet underwater, which means that Lake Vaughan would have had to fluctuate at least 80 feet to be able to have these exposed above water. Now, Lake Vaughan is what's called a closed basin system, meaning that it doesn't have any rivers that leave it. Okay, so it has rivers coming in and then nothing leaves. The only way that water can leave the lake is through evaporational cooling. There's no other way.
Oh, because of the flow of the rivers, you're saying.
And so, but the problem is that it wasn't always like that. Lake Vaughan used to have a river that exited it. In the southwest part of the river, there's a river called the Murat River, M-U-R-A-T, that used to exit the lake, and it was the only river that exited the lake. Now, if you imagine climatically in the last 12,000 years, if you're going to try to discuss how a lake can fluctuate its water levels, you would be like, oh, well, it went through different periods of rain and then less snow, right? And then dry periods. Well, that would only be able to fluctuate the lake a few hundred meters at most, right? Feet, not 80 feet. That would be something beyond any kind of mega drought to be able to do something like that, especially in a region that doesn't have those kinds of droughts. So I was doing research and I stumbled across something very significant that actually may change this whole ballgame. And I think it's one of the ways that we could have some what you call a smoking gun piece of evidence.
And what is that?
That joins Robert Schoch's and John Anthony West's water weathering of the Sphinx enclosure. When you look at historic records of Lake Vaughan, there's an anomaly you can find. There's a volcano on the southwest part of Lake Vaughan called Mount Nemrut, not to be confused with the other Mount Nemrut that's more in central Turkey. It is one of the largest volcanic calderas in the world. It's enormous. And in fact, Alexander the Great, when he traveled to that region, they visited that and they talked about it. Xerxes the Great visited this region too. It was an ancient region. We've talked about the biblical connections to the sons of Noah and this whole Ararat civilization thing that may tie into this mysterious civilization. So other cultures were coming here as tourists to see it. In fact, in Vaughan, there's a inscription carved out of the stone in a place called Tuspa, the castle in Vaughan, from Xerxes the Great. That's in that. So they were visiting this place. Anyway, in the southwest part of the lake, as I mentioned, is a massive volcano that has an eruption that was so big that it altered that entire region. Literally, the entire mountain blew up.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
And it has a volcanic crater, a caldera that is miles across. It's enormous. Now, when you look at data of this volcano, you find out that it's been extremely studied because it's one of the better calderas in the world, the bigger and more older and more well studied. And so you look at the dating and they've gone in, they've done cores into the volcano and they've studied the hell out of it. So we have a bunch of data from the volcano, which is interesting because it gives us the scientific evidence we need to help potentially prove the dating of this civilization. Let me tell you why. When you look into the records of what they found with this volcano is they found out that the volcano has had its last major eruption. So the one where it blew its top off, right, scattered stuff all over Vaughan, happened right at the end of the Younger Dryas.
Ooh, convenient.
Right at the end of the Younger Dryas, around 11,000 to 12,000 years ago, somewhere in there, 12, maybe 13, somewhere in that time period, the Younger Dryas, okay? So they know that that's when it last had its major eruption. There has been little minor ones since then, but usually volcanoes kind of burp a little bit, over time, but not a major one.
Yep.
So what happened was you find out that they have great geologic records of this, that when Mount Nemrut exploded, its debris, because it's right next to the Megalit River. The Megalit River is only a couple miles away, blocked off the access outlet of the Megalit River from Lake Vaughan, the only river that exits Lake Vaughan, blocking it off and basically completely separating it from the lake, creating a closed basin system where no water could leave Lake Vaughan again. Now, if you have a bathtub, I'm going to give the bathtub analogy, and you are filling the bathtub with water, meaning rivers coming in, right? Because there's big rivers that flow into Lake Vaughan, and you have a plug that's partially open. You're going to have the water come in, but some leaves. So you're going to have a somewhat consistent level of water that fluctuates a little bit, right? Based on how much you put in, but some's always going to leave. That's how lakes work, right? That's how you fluctuate the lake. What happens if you plug it up? Boom, you put the plug in. What happens? It all of a sudden fills up with an enormous amount, doesn't it? Well, how else could you account for 80 to 100 feet of lake depth change
That could do it.
to then flood over ancient civilization ruins and then put it somewhere? You now have dating from a geologic event that occurred that specifically blocks off the only outlet that would have allowed water to leave, keeping a steady flow in that lake, to then flood it over. And you have geologic dating proving when that event occurs.
Which means that this is older than that event.
Exactly.
Wow.
Which means that we now have what may be the best tangible evidence, or some of the best we've ever had, to prove that these are lost civilization evidence before the Younger Dryas.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.